Okay, and one more second. Sorry, we're all learning Zoom as we go along, and I'm getting better at it, but just give me one quick second here. We're making sure we can do the live stream on Facebook as we're doing this, so that's what I'm working on right now. I may be testing the limits of my home internet right now. Amy, I know you're monitoring from your location. Are you seeing anything on the Facebook page?
You know what? I don't have it up. Hold on.
Okay. I can't tell from my screen right now.
Christine is saying not yet.
Okay.
She's on there.
All right. Well, let's keep moving. Let me go back. Okay. We're joined this morning by Commissioner Heather Johnson of the Maine Department of Community and Economic Development, and by Benjamin Ford, an attorney and partner with Verrill Law in Portland. A few procedural notes before we start. First, the phones of all attendees are muted, so we won't hear each other's background noise. Phones will remain muted throughout the webinar. We will have a question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentation, but we'll look to answer timely questions as they're asked during the presentation in relation to the information on the slide. To ask a question at any point during the presentation, simply move your mouse towards the bottom of your screen, and within the black bar, there is a white Q&A icon. You can type your question in the box and click send. We are also attempting to live stream this webinar on the Retail Association of Maine Facebook page. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to those who have registered for review, as well as people on our wait list. With that, again, welcome to the CARES Act and Other Help for Maine's Retailers and Grocers webinar. Now let's begin. I want to welcome Commissioner Johnson first. Given the current situation, we're going to minimize the introductions and biographies, but I do want to say that Commissioner Johnson and her team have been incredibly helpful and responsive throughout this crisis. She recognizes how difficult this has been for retailers and grocers and is trying to find a difficult balance between protecting the health of Mainers and trying to be as flexible as possible with our essential and non-essential business operations. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, Curtis, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending some time this morning. I think this is it's a really good chance for us to talk about this balance and how do we kind of navigate our way collectively through this. So we appreciate your time and frankly all of the feedback over the course of the last week as we continue to create this protocol to try to keep both you, your employees, and consumers healthy as we continue to try to flatten the curve at the same time. So I know it's a difficult time. I think today, again, we'll do the best we can to answer questions that we have answers to, and to the questions that we don't have answers to, you know, we'll take them down and kind of keep working them and get back to the group. I think I'm really glad Ben is on the call because I think he's going to have a good perspective as well that looks a little bit different at what are the options and how do we navigate through them. So we have a number of resources at the federal level that I think that Ben will talk about as well. So I'll leave most of those for Ben, but we can maybe jointly do Q&A after. The state has some resources as well, and that includes 2 primary programs from the Finance Authority of Maine. Those are done also, well, one of them is done through your traditional lending partner, and then FAME will provide a guarantee. And those are really quick. They're online, and they are for operating capital. So again, the collateral components are pretty, the bar is pretty low for collateral components in that, because it's really based on hardship issues. And then if people aren't able to get loans through their lending institutions, even with a loan guarantee, there's a direct loan program through FAME as well. Once you've exhausted other lending options, you can go directly to FAME. And that is a program as well. It's a 12-month program. Again, it's designed to kind of be a bridge loan to get us all through this difficult part. The applications for both of those programs are now open. It took a little bit of time to get them set up, but they are both now open. And so that's that. From a Department of Labor perspective, Commissioner Fortman's not with us this morning, and they are still looking for some clarification. But there are a number of unemployment options as part of this broader federal program. The Department of Labor is taking in about 24,000 calls a day. So if you're having difficulty getting through there, there are some online resources that are available. I would say we're also at our department taking in more calls and emails than we can handle kind of in the immediate time frame. I think we're getting back to everybody in about 24 hours, but there are some clear things that we can put out there so that people don't have to ask specific questions necessarily. The list of what activities are essential and not essential, I think, is starting to have more clarity, and that we're about to post an update there. So hopefully that will be helpful. If you're an essential business, you can just operate. You don't need a letter. You don't need anything. If it's clear under the guidance that you are an essential business, go ahead and operate. If you're listed as a non-essential business, you can still go to your office and run payroll. You can still go to your office to get the mail and check on the facilities and those types of things. I think the language is minimal use, and that's discretionary language, trying to leave flexibility for business owners to meet their own needs. Non-essential retailers can also deliver products. Curbside has been shut down for non-essential, but it does give you room to ship products and deliver products to your customer. The Stay Healthy at Home order is trying to keep people at home as much as possible, but it does give you the flexibility to deliver to them in the extent that that's something that can work as part of your business model. So, so essential businesses don't need a letter. Essential employees don't need a letter. If law enforcement happens to pull somebody over, it's likely either because there's a car full of people and that is against the order. And if they're all family, then that's okay. They'll ask that question and that will be fine. But I mean, the governor's clearly said we aren't a police state. We aren't going to be pulling people over and checking IDs or any of that. We expect that people will comply with the order, right? It is about public safety and public health. If somebody gets pulled over for something else, like speeding or unregistered cars or things like that, they may ask where people are going. You know, again, this will be administered across the state, and we have put that message out to law enforcement. So I think there's good alignment there, but obviously we are, there are a lot of moving parts in this, and so that's no letter. You don't need a letter for employees. You don't need a letter for essential business, and if you're non-essential, you can still do some things in your facility. Check on the facility, run payroll, do minimal customer work, as long as it's not, as long as you're taking phone calls or internet orders and delivering to customers. So with that, Curtis, maybe it's a good time to pass it over to Ben and let him go through his piece, and then we can do the Q&A.
You got it. Thank you. Right now, there's only one question in the queue right now, and it's really directed more towards Ben. So just a reminder for folks that may have joined us late, down at the bottom of your browser, there's a white Q&A icon. And the way we'll do questions is you click the icon, type in your question, and we'll address the questions at the end. But Ben, we're going to turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys so you can see what we're talking about. These are just a couple of slides that will kind of help me guide the discussion. I've been asked to address some of the legislative solutions that have been passed, and I'm glad that Commissioner Johnson's on the line here, because I'm sure that that if I stray too far, hopefully she'll correct me from her understanding of the laws. This is a really an incredible time in terms of the size of legislations that have been passed, the size of the programs that we're trying to institute, and the speed at which we're trying to do it. So just to give you an example, last night at about, I don't know when it was, maybe 5 o'clock, we got new guidance from the Treasury Department, and so all night and all this morning we've been trying to process what that guidance is and how it can help you all make decisions. So let's hit the top parts now, and then we can, using your questions to sort of guide the discussion from there, we can, I'll take your questions after that. So Commissioner Johnson just talked about the governor's order, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but do look to the governor's guidance as to whether or not you're an essential business. And I would also say that there's also federal guidelines on what essential businesses are under that were put out by the Department of Homeland Security. But really, what we need to talk about is worker safety. If you decide that you can stay open, or you maintain operations, we get a lot of questions from a labor and employment perspective. Is can you take someone's temperature at work? Can you subject them to that kind of a search? And with one of those infrared pointers, and we're starting to see larger and larger employers do this. Walmart has started doing this in some of their stores, taking people's temperature at work. I question the scientific validity of taking someone's temperature at work, because we know that this can be spread regardless of symptoms. But it seems like in an emergency sense, you probably could do this and not fear any kind of issue under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That says 1 worker per boat. This presentation was used in the marine trades a couple of days ago, but you really want to do anything you can to keep workers separate as much as possible. Gloves, face masks, sanitation going around, limit face-to-face interaction. We should all know these rules by now. We've all become amateur epidemiologists. But what people are really interested in is making that payroll and keeping these people employed, or making sure that our workers are well off, and they're not, or the impact to them is as minimal as possible. And for that, we have a number of tools. The analogy that was used the other day, which I think is apropos, is that all of these tools are like a jigsaw puzzle, and that's been dumped out on the table. And this week we're figuring out what all the tools are and what they include and how they work. But really, in the days to come, I think businesses and advisors will be thinking a little bit more strategically about how to put all these things in place, so that the business can come out as whole as possible and the workers can come out as protected as possible. So we've got paid leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We've got unemployment, the emergency powers, and also the unemployment enhancements that were passed as part of the CARES Act. We've got the SBA disaster assistance loans, the EIDL program. We've got the payroll protection loans, which I know you're going to have a lot of questions about. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then we also have a small benefit, which really hasn't been discussed all that much in the media and in other fora, which is the employee retention tax credit. So I'll hit those really quick. First of all, the Coronavirus Response Act, paid leave, it's both paid FMLA leave. This is unlike regular FMLA, which applied to companies with 50 or more employees. This applies to almost everybody. This applies to companies with under 500 employees. In order to be eligible for the leave, the worker must have been employed in the last 30 days prior to the need for the leave. And there's really only one qualifying reason for the paid leave, which is at home because their school has been closed or their daycare has been closed. That is the only reason, that is the only qualified reason for this expanded paid FMLA leave. The first 2 weeks are uncovered under the leave. They can use their paid sick time for that, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the first 2 weeks are uncovered. And then after that 2 week period, or 10 working days, then they get paid 2/3 of their pay, up to $200 per day, and it's capped at $10,000. And then when they're done, when they come back to work, if the employee has that qualified reason for leave, the employer must make what's called a reasonable effort to restore to that worker to their prior position. Most analysts look at this and say that reasonable effort is a little bit less stringent than the FMLA, because this applies to smaller businesses. So reasonable effort means if your job's available when you come back, we're going to put you in that job, or we might have you do something else. Or if the job's not available, if we had to replace you, then what happens is we have to leave this worker on a call list, so that when the job does become available, we leave them on that call list for a year and we call them. That's what that reasonable efforts means. Paid sick leave. So we have the expanded FMLA program. Now we have the paid sick leave, and these are both under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. The paid sick leave is available to all employees, regardless of how much time they work. And under this program, they get 80 hours for a full-time employee. If you're a part-time employee, then we take a pro rata amount depending on how many hours you worked in the period before the crisis began. This affects, there's 6 reasons for the leave. They sort of break into 2 categories. One is employees who are affected themselves by COVID-19. Either they have an order to quarantine themselves, or they're experiencing symptoms and they're looking for a doctor, looking for a diagnosis, or they themselves are quarantined or they're sick. That category of qualifications would get the employee their regular pay up to $500 per day, or $5,110 in aggregate. So that's, if you're looking at the literature, that's reasons 1, 2, and 3. Reasons 4, 5, and 6 are employees caring for others. So if an employee is caring for somebody who's sick, or if an employee is caring for a child who is home, they get 2/3 of their regular pay, up to $200 a day, and $2,000 in aggregate. There's 1,000 little details here, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in the questions. But one of the big questions we always get is, can we, as the employer, require that the employee use their existing PTO before they use their benefits under the Families First Act? And the answer to that question is, you cannot require it. The employee gets to choose whether they want to use their existing PTO or whether they want to use their benefits under the FFCRA. And there's some reasons why an employer might want actually an employee to use their benefits under the FFCRA, because there's some significant tax benefits for doing that. The FFCRA, the idea behind this legislation is that we don't want to put a financial burden on employers at a time when they're struggling to keep their businesses open. And so what they did when they passed the legislation is they included tax rebates or tax credits that would equal the amount of the funds that they're spending on this paid leave. So the employer may deduct 100% of the amount spent on qualified leave from payroll taxes. And when they say payroll taxes, the guidance on this is really broad. It's FICA, FUTA, it's the employer share of withholding tax, and it's the, I should say, employee share of withholding tax as well. Now, the final word on this tax credit piece is really going to be with your accounting company. Give you a broad overview of what's potentially available, but for planning purposes, you really want to be talking to your accountant at this point or your tax professional at this point, because we're all sort of interpreting the laws as much as possible. But it's really important that you double check this with your tax accounting. But that's roughly how it looks. Again, the idea here is that the benefits are paid for. Through tax deductions, and so and that's not tax. That's not the tax that the particular employee or associated with that particular employee. That's the tax associated with that's the entire tax base of the employer. So that's a pretty significant benefit for employers that are looking at doing that. Now, what if you've got somebody that is not qualified? You want to furlough them, but you want to keep them on the books. Can you do that? Yes, you absolutely can do that. A furloughed employee who's still on the books, they can receive federal unemployment through the Department of Labor's Work Share program. They can still work. They can still work part-time, and they're still entitled. We think that they're still going to be entitled to the federal enhancement. Although I'm not sure that the state yet has rules rolling that out, but it looks like the way the law is drafted, that they would still get the $600 a week federal enhancement once they're on unemployment. The FFCRA paid leave would still apply though if they become qualified. So let's say you furlough somebody, you keep them on the books. Maybe they're working a day a week. Maybe you just cut their hours, but they're still an employee. If there's a childcare issue that comes up, or if they get sick, they can claim benefits under the Families First Act and then switch from collecting that unemployment to collecting benefits under the Families First Act. Keep that in mind. In order for them to still collect benefits while they're still working, you must have some intent to bring them back to work at some point. The weird thing is that the thing that's really causing a lot of discussion right now is that in some situations, employees that find themselves where they're furloughed and maybe they're working or maybe they're not, but they're finding themselves capable of making more money on unemployment than they are actually working. And I don't know if I haven't seen yet any rules that would discourage that from happening. I haven't seen any rules that excluding that from happening. And if anybody has any comment out there that they've seen that, I would be all ears. But I think there's a lot of concern that this creates a negative incentive for people. But then you also hear arguments on the other side that, the reason for unemployment the reason why we don't pay 100% on unemployment is because we want to encourage people to go look for jobs. That's exactly what we don't want people to do right now. We don't want them to leave their house to look for work. So then there's also laying them off completely. When you lay them off completely, they're eligible for unemployment with federal enhancements. In Maine, I hope this number is correct, but in Maine, if you add the federal enhancement to the maximum cap of unemployment, you're looking at about $986 a week. That's for people that make over a certain amount of money. It would be less expectation of return to work, but also there would be no entitlement to paid leave under the under the Families First Act should they become eligible. And finally, this is the program that we're all talking about today. This is the Paycheck Protection Program. This is available to companies with under 500 employees, or there's a secondary qualification that gets into the technical guidelines under the SBA. So if you have over 500 employees, you're not necessarily locked out of this just yet. There's some technical SBA guidelines and SBA regulations that might still allow you into the program. Also, if you have over 500 employees and you're a restaurant or a hotel, and you have or a casino, and you have less than 500 employees per location, you'd still qualify for it. So also available for the self-employed. It's an 8-week-long program, and it allows forgiveness for what you do is you take out a loan based on 2.5 times your monthly average payroll, and the loan will be forgiven to the extent you spend that money on payroll, rent, and utilities. And the program is administered through private lenders. So right now, there's a lot of people are talking to their banks and getting signed up for these loans if they're eligible for them. And then finally, there's the employee retention tax credit. This is a great program that could end up being a really powerful benefit for companies that are paying people to not work. So in certain situations, like for example, the firm where we work, and we have some situations where some of our employees can't work. There's nothing, they can't work from home, or they might have an issue that would prevent them from working from home. We still want to pay them because we expect that this is going to be over, hopefully, you know, within soon, and we want to keep these people on the payroll. Well, we can take a tax deduction for some of the, or tax credit for some of the payroll taxes that we're paying out to all of our staff. So this applies to a couple of things. It applies to companies that are required to shut down by government order. So if you fall on that list of non-essential businesses and you're required to shut down, then you would be entitled and you would be qualified for this program. It also applies to companies that have experienced a loss of 50% of their revenue. So even if you're an essential business, but your revenue is dropped by 50% compared to the same quarter last year, you can claim a tax credit off of in this program. If you have over 100 employees, you can take a 50% tax credit from the payroll taxes for any furloughed employees that you're still paying, and that's up to the first $10,000 of their income. So one way you could look at this is tax credit of up to $5,000 per employee for any employee you're paying that is furloughed or not working. If you're under 100 employees, you can take a 50% tax credit off of all of your employees. And so if you're a small business or a very small business, that would also be could be a pretty beneficial program for you as well. And again, the key people here are the first line of defense, or the first line of questions really should be your tax professionals and your accountants. And then if they have questions, the lawyers can sort of step in and help figure things out. But we're just trying to get this information out to people as fast as possible. That's all I have as far as prepared remarks. Let me get the screen to you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I appreciate that.
There you go.
I believe both Ben and Heather can see the questions as well as I can as well, and we can start at the top. And some of these may have been answered along the way. I was trying to take notes, but manage it in the background, but we can start at the top. The first question is related to the Paycheck Protection Program. What if you attempt to rehire employees and they don't return to work?
Okay, so the way the Payroll Protection Program works is that it incentivizes you, actually I should say it penalizes you if you can't get your staff, your full-time equivalent numbers back up by June 30th. And so if you have somebody that you rehire and they refuse to come back, then you need to hire somebody else. And it's really that simple. There's no, that's assuming like they don't come under certain protections, or that they're not related to any sort of benefits. But you really need to get those full-time equivalent numbers back up to where they were in the period. Either you can choose either the period last year over a certain period, or the period before the crisis happened, whichever is more beneficial to you. But you need to get those full-time equivalents back up. And so the law doesn't say they have to hire the same people back. It just says that you've got to get the FTE back up. And that there's also a rule that applies to salaries as well. So if you've cut salaries, then you have to bring your salary level back.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do think that's the important distinction though, because we're getting a lot of questions about that too. It doesn't have to be the same person. It just has to be the same number of people.
Helpful. This next question is for you, Commissioner. Did I understand correctly that non-essential businesses cannot offer curbside pickup?
That's right. Yeah, in this new Stay Healthy at Home order, curbside pickup comes off, but delivery and shipping are still options. So
Okay.
Non-essential businesses could deliver to their customers.
Okay, and we have a related question, which is perfect. Is it reasonable for a non-essential business to have items available for curbside pickup at another business which is essential? Or should we just stick with delivery and shipping items to customers?
You know, some of this I think will defer, I think, to some of the business owners. If if it creates less customer contact, less traffic on the roads, less people leaving their homes to do that, and there's a logical business relationship, I think we won't be able to weigh in on every single choice. The guidelines in the order include only shipping and delivery. But again, if there's a more practical, less impactful solution, I think people will make good judgments there. Our goal, though, is shipping and delivery.
And I appreciate that. We've spoken a lot this weekend, this whole week, about a lot of these questions we've been getting. And yeah, you consistently throughout it, you've talked about, is this going to make it safer for people? So if you approach it in that way as much as possible, the state is trying really hard, as I said in the beginning, to find this balance between trying to keep businesses open and viable that are essential, but also really trying to protect people's health. So we do have to add a little bit of common sense there as best we can. And, I thank you for that.
And Curtis, if I can just for a second before we go to the next question, this
Sure.
discussion about essential or non-essential, that language gets used because it's a determiner for executive orders and other things. Please don't read that into, if your business doesn't fall on the essential list, people don't think it's important or it doesn't play a critical role in our economy. It does. All businesses do. It's difficult to come up with kind of where that line is. And so, some people I know reacted to the non-essential language, and we relate that sometimes to snowstorms and people that need to be somewhere on a snowstorm day versus a non-snowstorm day. This is a different environment. But the non-essential list does not mean the business is not critically important. It just means the operations are going to have to be done in a different way.
Right. And I'll do a plug right now. I know we'll have it at the end as well, but the email address for people to ask questions beyond this webinar is business.answers@maine.gov. So anything related to these questions, shoot an email that way. I know you guys are getting a ton of emails, and it's not going to be an instantaneous response, but you are answering all those questions for people.
Yeah.
Next question, does home goods on the essential list equal home furnishings?
It doesn't. Home goods is really intended to be repair items. Repair material, so it doesn't include furniture, doesn't include kind of decorative type things. It's think really functional.
Okay. Next question, probably more for Ben. Well, maybe not, maybe for both of you. I'm concerned about a perceived conflict between the Paycheck Protection Program via the SBA and the additional $600 if employees are collecting unemployment. The goal is to keep or bring back employees to the payroll, but if they're at home collecting more than their regular payroll, it'll be hard to convince some to come back. As employers, what do we do?
Well, I'll take that one because I see, okay. So I think that, as we said before, you don't have to hire the same people back. You also, if they're on partial unemployment and they're refusing to come back, I don't see any restriction that would prevent you from just cutting off their hours completely and completely terminating them. Also, they have to remember that the federal benefit is limited in time. I think it extends beyond that June 30th deadline, but that would be, that would have been some pretty sweet legislation if we could figure out how to get those two pieces to line up. But no, I mean, I think that if you've got somebody that's refusing to come back and they're on unemployment and they're refusing to come back, then I think you would just cut them off and say, well, then you're not getting any hours for me, and we're going to hire somebody else and replace you.
Okay. Moving on, this seems to apply to a wide swath of companies given all the schools and daycares closed. Does RAM think this will bankrupt businesses? And is it illegal to keep an essential business on staff working from home while their kid is also at home? As far as bankrupting businesses, I mean, without question, this is a unprecedented event crisis we're going through. And we are very aware that it is impacting retail, hospitality, and tourism incredibly hard. And so we're working as hard as we can with our colleagues. We're reaching out and trying to help as many businesses as we can. Myself and my team, we have spent literally the last 3 weeks trying to help as many people as we can and answer questions. We know this is difficult. We're all trying our best to get through it. And we're just trying to do the best we can, as the same as you all are. Ben or Heather, do you want to answer the second part of the question about, is it illegal to keep an essential business on staff working from home while their kid is also at home?
Ben, I'll defer to you. It's a legal question, but I think there's the practical person in me wants to answer it, but I'll defer to the lawyer.
Well, I mean, I'll let you comment on the essential business part of it, but the reality is that we get a lot of questions of people that are taking the families first leave. Can they take it intermittently? In other words, can they work from home for a couple of hours and then go on leave for the rest of the day because their kid's home or their spouse comes home? And the answer is yes. They can take the leave intermittently, and so they don't have to take it all in one block. But the important thing here is I get so worried about people working from home and tracking payroll. The one thing that employment lawyers shudder is the FLSA and any kind of wage claims, because the penalties for messing with people's wages are huge. And so you really have to be very careful that you're paying people when you're expecting people to work from home, that they're being paid. You're expecting people to be available to answer emails immediately, then you've got to pay them for that time. If you're expecting people to sort of check in throughout the day, then you pay them for the amount of time they're checking in. Really important that you have no expectations on people to do any kind of work whatsoever unless you're paying them to do that. And then the other thing is, if you have people on salary and they do any work in that week, you have to pay them for the entire week. So, you really have to draw a bright line between what is work time and what is not work time. And then you have to draw a bright line between what is time that's compensated under the Families First Act, the paid sick leave or paid FMLA leave, and what is not, because that is a really important accounting question. A lot of people are using ADP or other payroll services, and they're creating a second code that an employee can use to code either their productive time or their leave time or their paid but not productive time. Because that paid but not productive time, you could end up with a tax credit for that if your business falls into that category of being affected or being shut down.
And I know you've said before, even before this crisis, make sure you document, especially those payroll records, that type of thing. That's critically important.
Yeah, and then you also have to drive that into the people that are working from home, because I stepped away and mowed my shoveled snow or picked up leaves or whatever, and is that you really have to get your employees to draw that bright line between working and not working.
Yep.
Big challenge.
Okay, moving on. What about employees who aren't sick or furloughed but are choosing not to work out of fear?
I guess I'll take that one too, unless Commissioner, you want to address it. So the answer is, if they don't fall into a protected category, one of those 6 protected category under the Families First Act, either they're affected by the disease or taking care of somebody else, and they're not, they just don't want to work, they're afraid to come into work, then technically they're not entitled to either unemployment or paid leave. Now, what we have done is we have seen businesses make staffing decisions based on who feels comfortable coming to work. So if you have say 10 employees and you really need to get that down to 5, what you might do is say, look, we're cutting staff. The first people that we're going to cut are those that don't feel comfortable coming into work. And then people can raise their hands. Yeah, I've got a kid at home, or my wife has respiratory issues, and we're kind of a high risk. So then what you would do there is you would say, okay, I'm going to lay those people off or put them on the work share program, and there you can answer honestly that this person's been involuntarily laid off. What you don't want to be, you don't want to be in a position where you're going to say, well, gee, we could really use you, but I'm just going to check the box that says involuntarily laid off so that you can get benefits. You really want to tie that to the need of the business. That's really important.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is we are seeing a lot of businesses trying to work closely with those employees to find solutions too, as an additional step, right? Or sometimes there are ways to kind of find a middle too before the layoff point would need to come, or the person kind of has no work options, that there are potentially some creative solutions if employers and employees are at least having that discussion.
Totally. And then I'll just add one more thing to that. This is a golden opportunity. If you're paying people and they're at home and they're not productive, this is a golden opportunity for online training. I mean, it's just fantastic. And to the extent there's any resources out there for retailers specifically, that's great. LinkedIn has some really great online training programs as well. So one of the things that employers could do is they could say, look, I'm going to pay you to take an online leadership class through LinkedIn. And so long as you bring me that certificate at the end of this, then we're golden.
Okay, next question, and I'm glad this question's being asked. So employees earning in excess of $100,000 are not eligible for forgiveness, so that money is calculated at 1/2 of 1%. And I assume we should include their wages in the average monthly calculation. And I know we've gotten this question asked different ways as well. So another way to ask it that I've heard is, can you include it up to 100,000 and just not the salary above 100,000?
So hooray, we finally have guidance on this. We got it last night. And so here's what you do. You take you take all of your salary, all of your payroll compensations, the money that you're giving out to people, okay? And that's one bucket. And then you take anybody that's making over $100,000 and you subtract out that amount that's over $100,000 that you're paying them. Okay, so that's one bucket. Then what you do is you take all of the other expenses associated with your payroll. So your health insurance, if you're doing a 401k program, you also take your state and if any local taxes that are associated with your compensation out as well. Then, so that is how you calculate your average monthly payroll. So in the answer to the question, it's up to $100,000. So from a penny to $999,000 is considered your average monthly payroll. Anything above that is not considered your average payroll. And the SBA is getting better about making that rule a little bit more clear. The prior version of the rules, it was completely contradicting what the statute said, and now it's getting closer and closer to being consistent.
Great, thank you. How do SBA disaster loans fit with the Payroll Protection Program loans?
That's another one that we just got guidance on last night. So what they're going to do is, if you have an existing EIDL loan, then you would take the 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, which is the amount that you're entitled to borrow under the PPP program. To that, you add the balance of your EIDL loan, including any advance that you've gotten on that EIDL loan, and that's the total amount. Now, what we don't know is whether you can get forgiven for the funds that you spent under that EIDL loan. We're not sure about that yet. That's going to be a key question to get answered today. So for planning purposes, I would say that you should plan on, for forgiveness purposes, just looking at the amount that you spend from the day you get the PPP loan going forward, that 8-week period, until we get guidance that says, yes, in fact, you can get forgiven for the EIDL loan as well. Oh, one other thing.
Yeah.
Once you get the PPP loan, then you're ineligible for the EIDL loans going forward. So that 7A loan cuts out your ability to get any other loans under 7B. And also, if you're doing the payroll tax credits, you can't get that. You can't claim the payroll tax credit, the retained employee payroll tax credit, and the PPP loan at the same time. It's going to be one or the other. People are going to go with the PPP loan in that case.
But can you still get that $10,000 grant that's part of the EIDL?
Yeah, I believe you can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is the effective date?
Sorry, you can if you. Sorry, it looks like you can get it. As long as you get it before you get the PPP portion of the loan. I don't think you can get it after you get the PPP portion.
Okay, helpful. When is the effective date for the employee retention tax credit? Do you know whether the 941 quarterly reports will reflect this beginning with the first quarter?
The last that I saw this, the 941s were being amended, and I don't know if anybody out there has seen any new Form 941s, but they should be. They're working on amending them. That program is retroactive, so you should be able to claim that exemption under your Q1 taxes if your business is qualified under those two criteria, either shut down or impacted at least 50%. But again, you want to be talking to your tax professionals on that one. But we're keeping an eye out for the updated 941s, and I haven't seen them yet, but I would imagine they're coming out soon.
Okay. Can you use the Payroll Protection Program loan for mortgage and business loans?
Great question. You can't use them for business loans. There's four things you can use them for. Payroll, and so you have to use 75% of this for payroll. You can't use any more than 25% for utilities, for rent, or for the interest portion of your mortgage payment. So if you're paying a mortgage payment, it doesn't apply to the principal of the mortgage, it applies to the interest portion of the mortgage. Those are the only things you can spend the money on. In fact, you've got to promise when you get the money, you got to promise that you're going to spend the money on those things in those proportions. So, you know, I worry, one of the things that came out last night was the banks were saying, look, we don't have the time to verify all of this stuff. And so we have to take people's words for it. And the SBA said, okay, banks, we'll hold you harmless, and we'll assume that people are going to do the right thing here. But then when this is all done, I think you can expect to see a lot of enforcement from the SBA checking on people who didn't spend the money correctly. And so you really have to remember that that's where that money goes, and you've got to show, you're going to want to be able to show that that's how you spent that money.
Right. If you get a payroll protection program and then have to shut down due to illness in the business, what happens?
Okay, so in that situation, well, what you would do is you wouldn't spend the money. And you would just put the money, you just pay the principal back with the remaining funds. I don't know how the math would work out in that scenario on your full-time equivalents, but you know, if you got like halfway through, like a month into it, and then you had to shut down because you don't have your full-time equivalent numbers back up at the end of that period or the end of June 30th. I'm guessing that there would be some sort of a reduction in how much you're going to get forgiven. Well, there will be a reduction in how much you get forgiven, but the fine details on that math would be something that we'd be concerned about. But if you do have to shut it down, the first thing you're going to do is stop spending that money and pay that money back immediately on the principal. You also have to remember this: they increased the rate last night, so it was going to be 0.5%. Now it's going to be 1%, and you're talking. Yeah, you're talking about a 1% loan that's spread out over a repayment period. I think it's 6 years. So it's still pretty cheap money when it comes to debt financing.
Okay. Can an employee refuse to come back if you offer them work and they'd still be able to get their unemployment and enhancement?
Can they refuse to come back? Yes. We don't have, there's no compelled work here. They can refuse to come back, but you can also refuse to employ them in the future.
Next question, are restaurants considered essential? I can probably answer this one, but Commissioner, you want to take it?
Sure. So the restaurant status hasn't changed. Restaurants can be open for curbside, for drive-through, and for delivery.
Right. Under the Payroll Protection Program, are there any rules against giving reasonable raises or a reasonable bonus for working the front lines? Good question.
That is a great question. I've yet to be on one of these calls or have a conversation with anybody that hasn't stumped me, and I get stumped a lot, and that one stumps me. No, the answer is I don't think there really is any restriction on you paying in excess of hazard pay, bonus pay. I think they would be happy to do that. But you got to remember, though, that the amount that you can borrow is tied to the amount that you've already spent. So you could find yourself in a situation where you've spent more money than the loan than you've borrowed. But I don't see any problem there. I think the intent of the legislation by putting in these $100,000 caps is to say, let's not give that money to the people that are making a lot of money already. Let's give that money to our frontline staff and the people that are really putting themselves at risk and working really hard. Excellent question.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner, next question for you. Will the numbers in large retailers be revisited? My visit to Walmart yesterday, where I stood in line in the rain, was much more exposure than I would have had under normal experiences.
Yeah, so that's a difficult one. There's been a lot of discussion about what is the right line there, how many people in the store at one time. does limiting the people in the store create more issues in the parking lot? How do we manage all of that? I will say that we have seen real issues with numbers of people inside stores at any given time because you can't space out and you create long lines at checkouts and other things. And so we're trying to balance we don't want you to have to stand in the rain either. And how many customers do you need to have at any given time to keep the business viable with the public health as the priority? And so there is a standard out there right now. I think, our plan currently is to give it a few days and try to monitor what that situation looks like, and then make ongoing determinations. I mean, this is an evolving situation. There's actually a national group looking at some potential standards as well,
Right.
that might help align. I mean, as we talk this through with businesses, with every business or association, Curtis was incredibly helpful trying to help us think through this as well. There were no clear answers. The industry didn't have a clear direction either, I think, on what is the right number. So I think we're learning this one as we go. Public health, again, is the priority. We're going to look at this anticipated national guidance and see if that gives us any more information. But I think the concern is absolutely for these stores that are overcrowded and have continued to be overcrowded even under these conditions.
And I'll add, I mean, as everybody knows, there's no guidepost or roadmap here. We're all trying to do the best we can. The commissioner has been very accessible and trying to talk through these things and try to make a best judgment. We know it's not perfect, but we're all trying to do the best we can. Moving on, how do employees file for work share unemployment benefit?
I'll start on that one, and then maybe Commissioner will have some more guidance. You go online and you go to the Maine Department of Labor website, and you'll see in the left-hand side of the screen, there's a big button there that says, I think it says enroll for rehire me, and it's mostly an online process, and that's about all the detail that I can offer at this point.
I do think that they have a new video up on their website as well to try to walk people through some of these key processes like that. So that might be helpful. They recognize they can't get to the volume of people that are wanting to talk to them directly. So they've created a couple of videos to at least kind of try to walk people through it and try to automate it as much as possible.
I think this question's already been answered earlier, but if you want to answer it quickly, what about employees who aren't sick or furloughed but are choosing not to work out of fear?
Yeah, so again, this is probably the most common question we get. The answer is that they're not entitled to any benefits. But as you mentioned, Curtis, you want to be flexible with people. You want to try to find solutions for people. You got to understand that people are scared and people are nervous. And some people are legitimately scared and some people are illegitimately scared. I've taken a lot of calls from people where it's like, yeah, okay, what they're really trying to do is look for benefits. And that's fine. I mean, but we're going to try to be flexible with people who have a legitimate reason to not work. And the answer is that if one thing you can do is you can say, well, we're going to cut payroll. If we're going to cut payroll, then the first people that we're going to cut are those that are have a legitimate fear or concern. And then we can say legitimately that this person's been involuntarily furloughed. And then they can collect unemployment or some form of work share from the Department of Labor. The other thing to remember, though, is we talk about these benefits in the abstract as if it were possible for an employee to just go from the workplace onto unemployment and immediately get benefits. And the reality is that yes, the laws are in place and the regulations are in place, but there is a lag in processing the absolute massive volume of applications, both on the unemployment side and on the PPP side. So, we make business decisions based on reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that it's taking a long time for people to collect benefits from their employment. And the reality on the ground is that it's going to take a very long time, maybe another couple weeks, before we see benefits funds rolling out under the PPP program. Also, the PPP program is first come, first served. So as soon as that money's gone, it's going to have to be reappropriated from the legislature. And if it's not reappropriated from the legislature, then the money's no longer available. Think for a moment about how many people, how many small businesses and hotel chains and restaurant chains and casino chains could apply for this program. It's capped at $10 million a piece. So, you know, that's a lot of money, that's a lot of people, and that's a system that is going to get bogged down, you know, for a couple of weeks, and then that money is going to dry up quickly. So you really need to be in touch with your bank now, like today, if you haven't talked to them already, and start getting those applications in.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that is true. I believe the total amount is what, 349 billion? And it is capped. So yeah, the applications are open today. And I know folks are encouraged, like you just said, talk to your bank, get that application in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, as soon as you're done with this webinar.
Yeah. What if you're trying to rehire without success, then hire replacement folks, but there isn't anyone applying, which was the case for the last year or more? And yeah, I'll add, I mean, you know, 4 weeks ago, our biggest problem was employers not having enough qualified people to work. And here we are today. So
yeah, it's amazing. So, you know, this is, you really want to retain your staff as much as possible. And one of the key strategic priorities here is to use these programs that will allow you to retain that really valuable workforce. And that's why the furlough option is really great for people. The payroll, the employee retention tax credit is also really great for people. It's, you know, keep that link to your existing staff and do whatever you can to keep them from getting too far away from you and your company. Stay in contact with them as much as possible. I mean, to be the harsh guy, I guess in theory, like if people do leave and they don't come back by June 30th and you still can't hire people under the law, yeah, you don't get forgiven for that, you know, for that portion of the payroll. But the other thing is you're also not spending all that principal either. So you might be okay, but you know it really is designed to incentivize you for getting those people back. And let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
and I
The
guess
other thing I would say is the new unemployment rules don't require people collecting unemployment to look for jobs, knowing that we're trying to help tether employees to businesses. And so that may be helpful too.
Yeah.
Right. And my hope is, you know, once we get over this hump and, you know, I don't know if we're going to get it all clear at some point, but once things improve, you know, the economy was so strong before. I'm hopeful that the desire to have a job and work and get back to normalcy will be helpful as well.
Totally. Fundamentals are there, right? For a
Right.
great economy. We've got low interest rates. We've got, you know, reasonable oil prices or energy prices. We also have these, you know, great programs. We've got $2.2 trillion of cash floating around in the economy. We got to spend it on something. So let's get back to work.
Yeah. How do we manage bringing back staff back and keep them healthy in order to be in compliance with the 75% requirement for payroll protection loan forgiveness?
The 75% rule is eluding me right now, but yeah, you will have to take precautions, and you'll have to follow the Maine CDC and federal CDC guidelines as far as keeping people safe. And I'll defer to other people on how to do that.
I think the 75% is 75% of the PPP can be applied to payroll.
Right.
Oh, got it.
That's
Okay.
That's my understanding. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah. Good.
These next couple questions are really good. I received a notification that my unemployment account would be charged for the employees who have filed for unemployment so far. Is this just a glitch, or is this something I answered wrong in completing the wage separation report? These employees were laid off because of COVID-19 and forced my business closure.
So on that one, my understanding is that unemployment claims weren't going to hurt your experience points on your unemployment account, but I don't have any further information beyond that.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Commissioner, do you have anything to add?
That was my understanding as well. I would reach out to DOL. It sounds like something's happened.
Right. Yep, that would be my guess as well. Can you include contractors? For instance, your marketing person who you pay a monthly fee in your monthly payroll calculations.
Oh, that's a hard one. Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the guidance on this one and say that I don't really know because we have some conflicting information. One piece of information says that you include the amount that you spend on contractors and your 1099 people in your payroll calculation. Another guidance says that those people should apply on their own for benefits under the PPP program. So I'm going to punt that one and say what you want to do there is probably ask your lender what they're going to want to see. And then maybe what we could do, Curtis, once we get guidance on this specific question, maybe we can follow up with folks and try to get that answer out.
Yeah, thank you. Because my guess would have been, and I'm glad you're unsure of it, would be that they wouldn't be included because I was aware that independent contractors and self-employed people can apply separately. So,
yeah,
but yeah, let's.
Yeah, when you go through the list of things that you include in there, it does include some payments to contractors.
Yeah. So. Okay. So the next question referred to that same question as well. So we'll skip past that one. Rent paid to owners of the is rent paid to owners of the business a qualified expense?
Should be. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the same question. Does the loan portion for rent also include when the owner of the business owns the property?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just rent of the business, so that should be okay. Yep.
How do you apply for the $10,000 grant? That's part of the Small Business Association, Small Business Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So that's the first $10,000 you can take immediately and not have to pay it back, but you still have to qualify under the requirements of the EIDL.
Yeah, so that one, I'm not as versed as well in the EIDL program, but I'm pretty sure that you can go to the SBA.gov website and find the information that you need there. I believe, and you can correct me if anybody knows this differently, but I believe that those programs are also administered through private lenders, but I think the SBA itself has some role in the application process. I just don't know. But I know that if you go to SBA.gov, you can find out all the information there.
Okay. And I may have skipped across one. I know somebody had posted a short while ago for me to reshare the email address for Department of Economic and Community Development. That's business.answers@maine.gov. So any questions related to essential, non-essential businesses, or the operations that retailers and grocers are having to undergo, shoot an email to that email address. I'll put a screen up at the end with folks' contact information, including that email at the end as well. Another work.
I just want to add to that, Curtis. Though,
sure.
If your answers are answered, you don't need a direct personalized answer, like to keep your business open or to give to your employees. We're getting a lot of those kind of questions, and you don't need to do that.
Great, thank you. Another work-share question. Does the employee or the employer sign up for this? My understanding is the employer must sign up the employee.
The employer signs up for the work-share program, and then I believe that when the employee applies for benefits, then those two pieces are connected under the program.
Okay. If an employee is involved in a split custody child order and the other parent is threatening to keep their child full-time because they are home and our employee is an essential employee and must work, what are the employee's options?
So that is a great question. We get that question a lot. And in shared custody situations, first of all, we have to sort of be careful about how much we get into our employees' personal lives and their custody situations with their children. So in a shared custody situation, right now the current thinking is that we're going to take the employee's word for it if they have a shared custody situation and they're saying they need to stay home full time to deal with the child, unless we have a really critical person and we're suspicious about whether or not they actually have childcare issues. We had one situation last week where an employee didn't even have custody of their children, and they were looking for leave under this, and in that case we denied it. So but in most cases, we're gonna take our employees' word for it that they have this situation and that they need these benefits. And so in that scenario, I think that what we're gonna do is say, well, look, you're entitled to do this. You're entitled to take these benefits. But also remember in this situation that we are the return to work provisions here aren't as strict as they are under the FMLA. So if we have to hire somebody to replace you, it could be a while before we have your job replaced or that we have you back into a similar or equivalent position. We're going to use reasonable efforts to make that happen, but we're going to be, it's just going to be harder for us to replace you. So this is a shared burden between the employee that needs the childcare and has those issues, and the company that has to actually have their staff. For questions like that, where you're getting into the little minutia, you really want to get counsel in that situation and have somebody to talk to work out the details of a specific situation. We can talk about these sort of hypothetically, but it really does come down to a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and we'll do one final question. Unemployment, how are involuntarily laid off employees treated in the state?
Well, involuntarily laid off employees are eligible for benefits, for unemployment benefits, and they also will be eligible for the federal enhancement to that benefit as well. So I hope the answer is they're treated well, and that we can get them back to work as soon as possible.
Okay. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank everybody who's been on this webinar this morning. Thank you for the emails and compliments we've gotten as far as this being very beneficial and helpful. That was our goal. On behalf of myself, Christine Cummings at the Maine Grocers and Food Producers Association, thank you for participating. Thank you very much to Ben and Commissioner Johnson for your time this morning. As always, we are absolutely here to help. You should see on your screen our contact information. Shoot me, shoot Christine an email. We will try to get your questions answered if it wasn't fully answered today. But thank you, everybody. This webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting it on Facebook and through YouTube after this event as well. But I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.